Hi, my name's Josie. I'm the Artistic Director of Art Gallery. Welcome to today's video. In this video, I will be interviewing Arron from the Gap Art Space, which is literally next door to Art, and also the Mix Cafe, which is part of the Gap and used to be Art Cafe. So our spaces are linked, and I thought Arron would be a really good person to interview about talking about his experience of starting a gallery space and the barriers that came with it, the experiences he's made along the way. There's a full transcript of this video in the description box, so please make sure that you find that if that is helpful to you. Please also turn on the captions. They have been created for you and edited, so you can have subtitles if this is useful for you to have. Just as a quick disclaimer, this video with Arron is very much Arron talking about his own experience, so it is not a universal approach to starting a space. Arron also talks very much in the Balsall Heath, Birmingham context, so this is a video that's very much relevant to local people and people generally in the UK, because methods and funding and policies do differ from country to country. I'm joined today by Arron from Gap and from the Mix Cafe. Both of these are literally next door to Art, and yeah, let's get straight into it. So my first question was, can you give us a quick rundown of how Gap was started and how and when you got involved with it?
Yep, no problem. So the Gap actually started out as a youth theatre company back in 2000 and early parts of 2009, and at that time it was called Theatre Arc, and I joined it then, I think when I was 14, as an actor. And the difference about Theatre Arc, which was conceived by Kerry Townsend and Richard Holmes from Big Brum, and Kerry now, his colleague and mentor with the Gap, that it wasn't just training young people in sort of performative aspects of drama, but it was actually using drama as a means of getting young people to ask themselves, what does it mean to exist in this world? And for me, these sort of really deeply profound questions, exploring through drama, was the way that I began to really understand who I was a bit, that I wasn't being able to do in other parts of my life, in my family or at school. So that really grabbed me, that did. And that's something that we've carried over, that sort of core element is something that we've carried over into the company these days. And the youth theatre also made a lot of space, not just for people to get involved in sort of performance, but it also was getting young people to manage budgets and do marketing and production, so it was really felt like you had ownership of an actual company, and you actually did. Then the company developed itself quite a bit. It became a multidisciplinary arts organisation, whilst retaining that core identity of drama and education. And we were always committed to championing young people and creating cultural and creative opportunities, meaningful cultural and creative opportunities for young people. We did a project called New Light in 2011, which was about the demonisation of young people post-2011 UK riots. And it was that was a self-portrait photography project, but still used the concepts of what does it mean to be a young person in today's world, and exploring it through drama, but using photography as its medium. Then the company became the Gap Arts Project in 2013, and we became a public venue a few years later. Maybe a little bit of context about what the name means might be a bit useful as well, because I think sometimes people hear the name The Gap or the Gap Arts Project, and for us it has a really, really particular significant meaning, and we don't often get the chance to say what that means. So the easiest way that I understand it is that the Gap is a drama concept. It's a part of the methodology that we practice that takes inspiration from the theatre of Chris Cooper, Big Brum, Edward Bond, and what it means is the Gap is a sort of metaphysical space in where you make your own meaning. So, for example, in society, we say that you want to close the gap generally. So you want to close, for example, the gender pay gap. Right? Yeah. What we say is that we want to open gaps. We say, for example, things like government, ideology, authority in all of its various guises tell young people what to do, what to think, what to dress, what culture they should be engaging in, what culture is accessible to them, what art forms are accessible to them, what not. That's where we want to create the gap. We want to break that a little bit, using different creative forms so that young people can step into that gap and understand who they are in relationship to the world. And that's what we try to do with the physical space. That's why we called it the gap. You step into the gap, and it runs throughout all of our work as well.
I love that. That's so nice. So, following on from that, how would you say your relationship with that organisation has changed over the years?
Yeah, that was a really challenging question when you asked me, because it really confronted my personal journey, which is useful to do from time to time, isn't it? So personally, I think I said before, I joined the company when I was about 14 years old, and now 12 years later, I'm a core team member, and I've been in this job for about 5 years now, and that role is sort of everything and anything, from delivering projects to fundraising to management, venue management, and every single thing in between that as well. What I really particularly feel like one of my key roles has been is developing it into a public space, and helping to embed the company in the local community, Balsall Heath, which is where you're based and have been based for a long time as well, and which is where we are, and which is where I live, and all the rest of it. But when you ask about what my changing relationship to the company is, I think that the only way that I could understand it is that my changing relationship to the gap is in context to how the world has changed over the past decade. And what I mean by that is that we've really seen sort of the devastating effects of austerity that has had on a generation of people who have grown up in it, the effects of the hostile environment policies, the increases in poverty, mass low-wage economies for a whole generation, and I am that generation. And also, provisions for young people decimated across the board, so mental health support in Birmingham in particular is shocking. And what I think has happened is that community arts organisations have had to step into the role that the state not only is supposed to provide, but has actively disenfranchised.
Yeah.
So if you're a community arts worker now, you're not necessarily a producer, a writer, a designer. You become a sort of social worker. You become a community organiser. And for me, I sort of never anticipated that happening. Like, I've always had that in me. But when I started, that was sort of external to how I understood art, how arts work. But now, all that sort of social community resilience stuff is completely central to I think what the organisation does and is now. So I think everything that we do, we have to ask ourselves: are we being resourceful? Is what we are doing meaningful? Does it make a material difference? And these are sort of really big questions I think that every particular community arts organisation should be asking themselves every step of the way. So yeah, my relationship has changed in the context of the abyss of the world that we live in.
It's so interesting hearing you say this. It's so true for me as well. And I think you don't initially really sign up for that either, because you don't have any kind of training to deal with like complex mental health situations. And I think over time I've become more empathetic to understand where someone's coming from, but that requires a lot from you. And when you're, essentially, especially if you're in, like, for example, the cafe space, and someone comes to you and you're already overworked and underpaid and undervalued, and, is in your face with whatever they need or want from you, it's so hard to, like, actually take them seriously and listen to them and empathize that, you can help them in that moment, because what you really want to do is just go like, oh my God, this isn't me, like, leave me alone, right? So yeah, I don't know if there's a question in that, but there's definitely something over the years that I would say I've had to grow a thicker skin, and there's times when I can be really giving and supportive, and times I have to just say, like, no, it's enough for today, or I can't deal with this particular issue.
I mean, I think that's really useful, because what it sounds like you're talking about is really taking it on yourself. And I think one of the key things that I've learned in these settings is that that's impossible to do. So it's really key for us, for example, to make sure we know where to signpost. We know what's bullshit and what's not bullshit. We know who the good people are. We know what the good fighters, and that we really listen to people. Because you're right, people do come in all the time with different issues that people are facing, and I don't have all the answers, and I never profess to. But what I can do is make space for you at least, or get you a cup of tea or something to eat for that day or something like that. But yeah, I think it's about community building, not trying to do it by yourself. I think is what I've learned. Also, people just need space. That's something that I've really realised. Like one of the key things I think about running a venue is that regardless of what it is, people need space. There's public space has been decimated as well, isn't it? And I think in this city, in Birmingham in particular, I'm from Birmingham. I've lived here pretty much all my life. Never really interacted with the city centre. I don't know any of my mates who really do either. So you don't go to hang out in the city centre. Everything happens in small towns and things like that. So then we have a role as community artists or people who run public spaces as well to think about what happens beyond the art, and how are you holding that space, because there are sometimes there's nowhere for people to go, so that's something I think about quite a lot.
Yes. So have you ever started your own art space gallery business? I mean, I feel like you've half answered this one already.
Yes. So yeah, we run the venue that's next door to you. That was your old cafe as well.
Yeah.
So we worked in the same building. So I started that, but by no means was it something that I did by myself. And I think that's something that when you asked me this question in the email, that I really wanted to stress, which was that I think, and I guess I'll come on to it in a different question, but there's myself, there's a couple of other people in the core team, and then there's our board of trustees as well, and there's more people, but particularly when we were going through the process of building and starting a space, it was impossible to do it yourself. You don't have all the key skill sets. You need to be able to bounce things off from people who have different experiences and expertise.
And ask for help when you don't know.
Always ask for help. Yes, definitely.
I agree. I guess that makes the next question irrelevant, does it? Or did you
the barriers question?
Yeah, we can ask what are the barriers.
Oh yeah, no, I've got other stuff to say about that. There's so many barriers. So being able to be steady, like this isn't, if you don't mind, it's sort of about the space, but it's also generally about the barriers of working in the arts and general context as well. So being able to be steady in the arts world is difficult enough, and I think when you're racialised, it becomes even harder. So I learned pretty early on that I was going to have to stick up for myself, to create my own structures. I think that's a really key thing, and not rely on existing ones that have historically been active in subjugating people like me, and what I mean by that is black and brown folks. So I've had the opportunities to work with and for other organisations. Sometimes they're big national large organisations, sometimes they're very small organisations as well, but they are historically steeped in a culture of whiteness, and whiteness in particular relation, because I think whiteness in the arts is a very particular type of discourse. And I realised really early that there was no way that I could do that, and I've consistently said that as well. Like I will never dance for the white man. What I wanted to do, what was really key for me, is to figure out, to learn from my history, to learn from what has happened before me, because there is a brilliant history of black and brown. For me, what was particularly important was Asian and brown art spaces. And when I was researching them and I was thinking about what I want my space to be, it was amazing how it was so hard to find community examples of brown arts organisations that weren't tied to a location, to a geography, to a community, to a practice of community care and resilience. It was always so integral to what was also up on the walls and what their programme was. And it made me realise really quickly that there was no way that you could do this if you worked for the Tate or something like that, So for me, it was really important to create my own structures and to build cooperative models. For example, even pay parity, for example, is a really, really thing that we practice in our company. So I'll come back to this again in a different question, but we always make sure that there's pay parity, for example, or everybody gets a say in what programs are being designed, and it's always tied to the community that we live in as well. So there has definitely been barriers. The other thing that I'll talk about definitely as well is that one of the barriers that I faced, I've been a lot on these sort of professional development leadership programs, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God, they're terrible for the most part, because what they assume, and often the ones that I've been on, are specifically catered for black and brown people, right? It's diversity groupings for you to become an artistic director of a big building like the Rep or the Vic or the Old Vic or something like that. And that's also when I learned what the barriers are, because what that whole program is designed for you to do, and these are funded by the Arts Council, by national organisations. You know, people get dozens of thousands of pounds to run these courses, and it's, when I go through them, it's, how is this possible? Yeah, because it's all about how do you assimilate your exoticness into something which is socially acceptable to white institutional. And I've always said to myself, like, I already do this, but I just don't do it in a white culture. So therefore, to you, it's not valid. For you, I have to go through this training program. I don't need a training program. I've been doing my thing for a very long time now. I will train you, you know. But for some reason, it always seems like for me, I have to constantly be jumping through these hoops, because this art world will never allow me to do my own thing. It will always, at the top level, it will always ask me to assimilate. So that's why, for me, starting my own space, starting my own thing was non-negotiable. Yeah.
Did you have any special training for the work that you do now? And if not, what other types of training do you use, such as self-directed study?
Special training. So I've got a degree in theatre and performance, which, whilst I don't feel like it was the most useful academic thing to do, it actually taught me a lot in resilience and how to work in a creative field that is dominated by whiteness. When I did my degree, I was the only Asian person. There was one black person. Everybody else was white. Most people came from money. I'm the only person in my generation, in my family, to go to do something like this. So I don't think I learned practically skills relating to arts, but I learned resilience, which I think is special training. The biggest thing that I think I have in terms of training is a mentor. It's something that I really advocate for people to do all the time. And my mentor, I'm lucky that I work with my mentor. Most people don't get to do that. So Kerry, who's the founder of the company, I class her as my mentor. Sometimes she winces when she hears that word. But she's a skilled thinker and creative thinker, and she's resilient in her own right as well. And I'm lucky to have a relationship where constructive feedback and criticism is given wholeheartedly, and with the idea of growth as well. And then, yeah, like you suggested, I have self-study, and I think most people who work in these situations do constant, every night negotiation of what do you know, what do you not know, what's meaningful, how can I make things better for everybody. And yeah, so self-study, mentorship, and resilience are key things for my. Yeah.
What message do you have for young people who want to start their own space? Obviously, it's not just for young people.
Yeah, no, sure. It sounds so basic, but like, ask yourself why. I think you have to, most of the time, you have to have a really good idea why you want to set up the space. You know, at least one. I always call it like non-negotiables. Yeah, at least one non-negotiable reason that nobody's going to turn you over. That's not that you're committed to. That's going to drive. That's going to be the centre of what you're doing. You know. Otherwise, it might not be the right thing to do. I think a lot of people think that having a space is the answer to then they can do whatever they want. It just doesn't work that way whatsoever. Having a space actually can add a whole load of issues. It's very easy to have, when you have your own space, to stop producing work and you just become an arts manager or an arts organiser, which can be great. But if you're an artist yourself, I think when you're running a space, the administration of the space is just massive. So research into what exactly it entails, speak to everybody you can, because it might be better that you just collaborate with people. You know, you find people who have spaces that you trust and that you have share principles with, and you work with them. Because running a space is a full-time job and there's very little money in it as well. But if you still really want to do it, great, go for it, you know. And I think I said it before, the number one rule is don't do it by yourself. That's insane. You will burn out. Find people who have, who share your vision, who share that non-negotiable with you. Try to be clear in your mind about what that non-negotiable is as well. It can be conceptual, but have it written down somewhere as well. Share that with other people. If they get it and they back you, bring them in. Just share the workload really, and talk to as many people as you can. Research the stuff. Talk to me if you need to.
You just said that you're not going to earn much. How much do you earn?
Oh, I love that you put this question in. I really do, because it's such a useful question. It's such a useful question that I think people are absolutely afraid, totally scared of asking each other.
It's a taboo, isn't it?
Yeah.
You don't do that. So it's rude.
I was really happy that you asked that question, because it gives me the chance to be honest. Yeah. So I try and answer this as practically and as literally as I can. Yeah. So the question you asked me was, how much do I earn from my work in the Gap? Yeah. The easy answer is it's not a set amount. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the company is a charity. So it means it's not a formal employer. Nobody who works there is on a salary.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In fact, what's quite common is that everybody is a freelancer. It's just that most of the work that we do is freelance work through the Gap.
Mm-hmm.
So we work, which means we work on a project-to-project basis.
Yeah.
Which if people work in arts context, and particularly small arts context, is fairly common as well. So depending on what project I'm working on depends on how much I earn. What also that relates to is something that I said earlier, where that public money has been decimated and shrinking. So funds, every year we apply for the same funds, they get smaller and smaller and smaller, and which means that your wage gets smaller and smaller and smaller, but always the ask is always bigger as well.
Yeah.
So you always find yourself working for less money and doing more things. And it also means in this context as well is that when you only get paid project to project, all that other stuff, administration, venue management, staff management, just everything that's not a project, core costs obviously. Yeah? Nobody wants to pay you to do that, because it doesn't have the same type of outcomes. So that, I think people shouldn't fool themselves into actually how much unpaid voluntary hours, hundreds of hours, go into something like this. And it's actually something that I was thinking about. I was talking with a friend the other day actually, and we was talking about this, about how, let me try and find it because I wrote it down earlier. So it's really difficult to have financial security in the arts, generally, yeah, unless you're Nicholas Sorota or whoever, and particularly for racialised folks who don't have the same, quite often, intergenerational wealth that white people do, which means that they can afford to do precarious work because they have safety nets, financial safety nets, For people like me, it's incredibly intense to live on a project-to-project basis. You have to have side hustles. I have to have support networks, literally financial support networks, friends who I know I can. And it's a taboo thing as well to be like, I need you to support me this month. So it's incredibly intense to live on a project-to-project basis. And also, it really reminded me of this really super jokes tweet that I know that Toby from the Black Ticket Project, are you doing some work with Toby?
Yeah, for the last exhibition. There
was
was a producer workshop, yeah.
I saw Toby do this tweet years ago, and I used it in an article I wrote. And I still come back to it because it makes me feel so funny. If you're the only black or brown person in your arts organisation, then you're also its unpaid diversity officer as well. And I laugh about that quite a lot because for some time I was the only racial, everybody else was white in the organisation. It's a bit different now. And that was the role. I didn't realise it until it's said to you, but I realised by default I'm a diversity officer, and there's a whole load of things that come with that as well. So how much to go back to your question, how much do I earn? It's not much, but that is not the fault of the company whatsoever. It's really not. That is the fault of living in a world, a society, an economy, and I would say government, but I don't think they would be any better either. Living in a world that completely disenfranchises the arts as a means of gainful employment or of, you know, of linking it to, even if it was more linked towards education, you know, if there's a more formal link between community arts organisations and education settings, there'd be pathways, clear pathways for artists like yourself or producers or whatever to gain extra income, have extra credibility as well. But yeah, the UK is extremely narrow-minded in how it understands the value of cultural workers. And I say cultural workers as opposed to artists because I don't think it's just artists or people who run galleries or anything like that. I think it's extremely broad. Anything to do with cultural work is deeply undervalued. And it's crazy, isn't it? Because as I said earlier, like these things, we do the job of the state socially, you know. I filled in so many sort of like employment forms for people, so many housing forms for people who come in off the street who maybe don't speak English as their first language or don't have the time, or taking people to internet cafes and help them log on. You know, that's part of my day-to-day work as much as running projects for young people, as much as hanging paintings on the wall. I probably do that more than I do artwork, you know? It's insane.
Yeah.
Can I just add a small thing to that?
Yeah.
I think, for example, like most people might know what the white people are, yeah?
Yeah.
I think some of the things that they're doing about finances is brilliant. You know, they document their incomes and outgoings on their website. Amazing. Because one thing that does is not only makes it accessible for somebody who's about to get into the arts, understand, okay, this is generally, you know, and they're at the top of the game in it. Everybody knows them, blah, blah, blah. So that's what the top end looks like, you know. So imagine when you're just starting out. But it also puts pressure, and I think that's one of the intentions as well, isn't it? It puts pressure on universities, or if you want to hire artists and whatnot, to think about. You need to pay people on time. You need to pay them proper wages. Otherwise, we'll just out you. We'll just shame you. And I think that's absolutely fine as well. Okay. Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for watching. I'm hoping to make this a series, so there should be more interviews coming up. If you are interested in seeing them, make sure to subscribe to Art Gallery's YouTube channel so you don't miss out. Thank you. Bye.